Comment. What's that? Yeah, if he was really telling the truth, these folks had to change. Well, it's the first time I've heard it come through the speakers. Jesus' response, verse 57, but Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honor, except in his own hometown and in his own home. We recall from John 7 that even his brothers didn't believe in him. And so he didn't do many miracles there because of their lack of faith. Now this is the reason why I have this picture up there, because beginning in what we have, chapter 14, Matthew gives us a parenthesis, okay? He takes a little story and he sticks it into the context, kind of like in parentheses, beginning in chapter 14 and verse 1. Let's read that together. At that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard of the reports about Jesus. Now, and he told his attendants, this is John the Baptist, who's risen from the dead. That's why these miraculous powers are at work in him. There's probably a lot of fear there. And then Matthew goes back and says, now, Herod had arrested John and bound him and put him in prison because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife. John had been saying to him, it's not lawful for you to have her. Herod wanted to kill John, but he was afraid of the people because they considered John a prophet. Herod was afraid of the people. Keep that in your mind. On Herod's birthday, the daughter of Herodias danced for the guest, pleased Herod so much that he promised with an oath to give her whatever she asked. Prompted by her mother, must have been a wicked lady, she said, give me here on a platter the head of John the Baptist. And the king was distressed, but because of his oaths and the dinner guests, he ordered that her request be granted, and he had John beheaded in prison. Herod was, I'm trying to think of a good word to describe him. He's afraid of the people. So he doesn't want to arrest John because he's afraid of the people. And yet, when he's at a party and he makes a rash vow like that, probably under the influence of alcohol, he goes ahead with it. He's still afraid, but he does it. Verse 11, John Baptist's head was brought in on a platter given to the girl, gruesome, who carried it to her mother. And verse 12 is what I wanted to use for a springboard into our text for today. John's disciples came. Okay, all of this is happening in Jerusalem with John the Baptist. John's disciples realized we need to tell Jesus about this. John's disciples came and took his body and buried it, and then they went and told Jesus. They made a couple of days' journey up to Galilee to tell Jesus about that. Chapter 14, beginning in verse 13. And I want, anytime we look at these passages, for you to focus on the humanity of Jesus. Focus on his divinity, but a lot of times that's easier for us, and to focus on his humanity. Verse 13. When Jesus heard what had happened, John being beheaded, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Why do you think he did that? John was his friend and his cousin. What did Jesus write about or say about John? What's that? John was his herald. He prepared the way for Jesus. There's nobody greater than John the Baptist. This was a blow. Did Jesus know that, of course, John was okay? He was in the hands of the Father? Yeah. But there's some humanity at play here. Some important humanity. Jesus is touched by that. And, you know, Matthew makes a very good point in this context, as he does in others. Yeah, he was a man. He was a man in every aspect. He felt things that we feel. Well, when the crowds heard this, here the same verse 13, hearing of this, I don't think they heard that Jesus was sad about John, but they heard that Jesus was in the area. And look at what it says. The crowds followed him on foot from the towns. Now, I think I marked John 6. I can't remember if it was John or Mark, where the people realized that Jesus had gone to the other side of the lake, and so they walked around the lake to make sure they could find him. They wanted to see more miracles. And that's where we are today. Jesus, Matthew chapter, now I'm in John. Matthew chapter 14. Jesus landed, verse 14, and saw a large crowd. And notice again his humanity. He had compassion on them. Now, I have to tell you, one of my favorite Greek words is used here for compassion. And that's a word, this is a great one, splagnizomai. Doesn't that just sound splagnizomai? Splagnizomai is a word that's translated, he had compassion on them. He was moved in his innards, literally. He was moved in his gut for those people. That's what compassion, to feel compassion means. We tend to, in our Western culture, say, oh, I felt it in my heart. You know, I was moved in my heart. But the Greeks and the Jews would say, I felt it in my innards. You know how you get butterflies in your stomach sometimes? That's that feeling. That's that splagnizomai. Gut-wrenching. There you go. There you go. A few other passages, if you're taking notes, John 11 and verse 13. This is not the same word, but shows us the same kind of compassion. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews, this is at the death of Lazarus, you remember? When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Now, they may have had some other reasons for his being troubled then. Matthew chapter 9 and verse 36, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. I can't emphasize enough the picture of Jesus that we're seeing in these passages, of his ability to feel compassion, to look out and see people who are harassed and helpless because that's right. I think that's important, Waylon. The human side of Jesus. I think if we want to really look at our world around us like Jesus did, we have to be able to look out and see the people when they're harassed, when they're helpless, and feel compassion on them. And not just feel it. Do something about it. Do something about it. Matthew 20 is another passage where it says, these are blind men that Jesus healed. Jesus had compassion on them, touched their eyes, and immediately they received their sight and followed him. Just some good examples from what we read in Matthew 14:14. When Jesus landed, saw a large crowd, had compassion on them, and healed their sick. I want you to think, been a long day. Jesus is teaching those people. He needed to get away. He needed his retreat. That's another thing you think about. Jesus was human. When he was stressed, when he was feeling harassed, he needed to get away. And he withdrew often, didn't he, for prayer. But when he saw the needs of people, that took a precedence. And that's what we see here. That's what we see here. What follows is a miracle, as I said, that we read in all of the Gospels, and we'll bounce around a little bit. As evening approached, verse 15, the disciples came to him and they said, this is a remote place. It's getting late. Send the crowds away so that they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food. Jesus replied, they do not need to go away. You give them something to eat. Verse 17, well, we "We have here only 5 loaves of bread, 2 fish," they answered. "Bring them here to me," he said, and he directed the people to sit down on the grass. In another gospel, we read that he put them in groups, had them put them in groups of 50 or 100. Taking the loaves, 5 loaves and 2 fish, and looking up into heaven, he gave thanks, broke the loaves, and then he gave them to the disciples. And the disciples gave them to the people. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 baskets of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Now, when we read something like that, from a non-Christian standpoint, we're automatically looking for scientific ways that they could have worked this out, okay? Have you read any of those? Well, I read somewhere, everybody probably brought their own lunch, and so they just had it extra and shared it with everybody. Right, okay, how many people are we talking? 10,000 plus? Yeah, 15,000, most people would say. One writer even went so far as to say, and this one I have to keep from laughing, one writer said that the disciples stored bread in a cave beforehand. Sometimes it's easier to believe on Jesus than it is to be an atheist. Just to be real honest. It's harder to be an atheist than a Christian believer. Well, let's just jump to the story in Mark in chapter 6 and see if we see some differences before we move on. Mark chapter 6. Verse 35. It's late in the day. His disciples said to him, "This is a remote place. It's already late. Send the people away so that they can buy themselves something to eat." Again, Jesus said, "Well, you give them something to eat." And they said to him, "That would take more than half a year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat?" How many loaves did they have? And that's where we read that. But I just wanted to read that one because of that comment. Well, that'd take a half a year's wages to buy that much bread. Let's look at John chapter 6. John chapter 6. This one's written a little bit differently. Sometime after this, verse 1, Jesus crossed to the far shore, the Sea of Galilee, and a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. Jesus went up on a mountainside, sat down with his disciples. Maybe that's how he was getting away. Jewish Passover was near, and when Jesus looked up, he saw a great crowd coming toward him, and he said to Philip, this is important, that's why I wanted to read this one. He said to Philip, "Where are we going to buy bread for these people to eat?" Did you find that comical that he says to Philip? Where are we going to find enough bread for 15,000 people to eat? And I imagine he had a twinkle in his eye when he said it, okay? Putting Philip on the spot. He asked this only to test him, for he'd already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered, "Well, it would take more than a half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite." Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon's brother, spoke up. "Well, here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far are they going to go among so many?" And that's when Jesus had them set down in that place in the grass, about 5,000 men, and he fed them. Interesting. I like it that John put some names on those faces for us, that Philip was the one that Jesus asked the question. Jesus' response to that, and we didn't look at that in Mark chapter 41, was to look up into heaven and give thanks, and then to break that bread and start passing it around. Does that remind you of anything else like that? Where Jesus prayed to God and then broke bread? I think it's very similar to what he did with the Lord's Supper, isn't it? Giving thanks to God first for that, and then breaking that bread breaking the loaves. Uh-huh.
And it was called Jesus, and it followed, I think, John's account. And in this scene, of course, thing that came to my mind was, where did the baskets come from?
Where did they get the baskets? That's what she wants to know. Well, anybody have an answer for that? Maybe from a hemp plant. Okay, that's a good answer. I don't know where the baskets came from. You know, I've had that same question when I've seen the pictures. I wondered, well, where did all of those baskets come from? I imagine every one of those people that was there probably did bring some provisions with them. They traveled along the Sea of Galilee, and they had a basket or they had a bag or they had something that they put their provisions in. Okay? But maybe so. Tomorrow? Okay, you're saying maybe some of the other people had food, but they weren't willing to share? Yeah, well, that kind of takes away from the miracle aspect of the whole thing, but that's possible. Possible maybe they had food and they didn't want to share it with other people.
Well, in the movie that I was watching, he actually also miraculously
Created baskets at the same time. Tony? Yeah. They didn't think about eating. Good point. Maybe they were so wound up in seeing all of these healings, hearing the words of Jesus, that they had just completely forgot to think about food. At any rate, Jesus made bread for 15,000 people in one afternoon, one late afternoon. And I want to just, before we move on, and I do want to move on today and cover some other things, but I wrote down some things that we can learn from this story. Some things pop up in your mind? Important lessons we can learn from this story?
I heard that nowadays it happens in a different way, but the same result happens through providence, not miracles per se.
Okay. I guess I don't follow you completely on that.
Well, I can't tell you all the details
Yeah.
because I don't have the mind of God just out right here.
Yeah.
But anyway, Dave Dallas, with Dallas Realtors, he was telling us his faith was about that. He's seen that same pattern just without the miracle. That is just providence.
Yeah. Okay. Don't see.
My observation was, why was the little boy there by himself?
Well, we don't know if he was by himself. His parents may have sent him up there. Who knows? But at any rate, he's the only one.
Willing to share it.
He was the one that was willing to share. One more comment.
Overall, how can we question things like that and be mind-boggling if we all, and even in the world, pray for people to heal, and we see that healing power,
Uh-huh.
they're healed, and we never question it.
Yeah.
But when we get into the Bible study, we have all kinds of comments.
Manuel, it's just that human part of us that says, well, how can something like that? I can't observe something like that today. That's so unusual.
I think lots of times we forget, like with a person that's ill,
Uh-huh.
we forget that if they are not healed on this earth and they die,
Okay, okay.
on the other side.
Yep.
One thing that is special about this that you kind of don't think about is that Jesus had no problem creating something that was fully developed. I mean, the bread was leavened bread.
They didn't have to make bread on the beach.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's just another act of creation that shows the power of God to create something that's fully formed.
Point number one in lessons that we want to take from this, isn't it a tremendous demonstration, again, of God's power to create, his creative power and his authority. And like Richard was saying, it's a good example, again, of how when God created something, he created it complete. Okay? When God created the world, it wasn't with tree seeds in the ground. Okay? Those trees were full grown. The animals were full grown. They weren't little cubs running around or embryos laying around. It was full grown. And that's the way God is. He makes things. And this is a great demonstration, and probably the greatest public demonstration of Jesus' power and authority. And it really, if you think about it, it validates who he was. This is the Messiah. This is a sign. This guy has got to come from God. Secondly, I think we see it again, an example of Jesus' capacity for empathy, compassion, and generosity. What a beautiful picture of Jesus we see here. His compassion, feeling for those people who are harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd, or they don't have anything to eat, they're hungry, they've been listening to him all day. Coaxed in that, or set in that context of his actually grieving over the loss of John the Baptist. Very, very important.
It also amazes me that the disciples were like, well, let's just send them away. Go back to the village with food.
They didn't necessarily have the same level of compassion that he did.
Let's feed them so they can stay and listen to my teaching, you know.
Yeah.
And the difference there, and that he knew that he was feeding them on the word, and that it wasn't so much the physical food that he was giving them.
Right.
It was the word that he was feeding them.
Jesus was feeding them spiritually as well.
Whenever I think about this, especially in the context that you're talking about, this is grieving, and then he sees some other people. Jesus has needs right now. He needs to grieve.
Yes.
And to a certain degree, you could say that this is another one of the temptations that Satan throws at him. It's like, well, you're grieving, so you could feel sorry for yourself, or you could. But Jesus sees the needs of others, and he sets aside, just for the moment, he sets aside his need to grieve and to just think through what's happened and pray to God to help people. He continues grieving later, but right now he sets aside his need to grieve because he needs to take care of other people.
James, there's a brilliant message there for us. Because all of us grieve. All of us have those times, and we need to set aside and grieve and maybe have some, just some aside time. But oftentimes the best way to get through that is to see opportunities around us and serve people. Have compassion on others, okay? Absolutely. Doing good for others, get your mind off of how you're feeling. A couple of other messages lessons we could take from that is using small things to do great things. We can do great things with our little gifts. We think about our gifts. Oh, I don't really have much of a gift. I can't do this and I can't do that well. But yeah, are you willing to use what you've got? Then God can use you if we're willing to be used. I hate to move on quick, but I wanted to close this section with a passage from Psalm 37. I love this, and it's just another sign of our trust. Psalm 37:25. I was young, and now I am old, but I have yet to see the righteous forsaken, nor their children begging bread. Isn't that a beautiful thing? I was young and now I'm old, but I've never seen the righteous forsaken, nor their children begging bread. You trust God that He'll take care of us and give us what we need? Very good point. Well, I want us to move on in the same context to Mark chapter 5. This is actually on the docket for next week in the Epic series. But I'm 1 week behind because we missed a Sunday, and so I'm going to try to catch up a little bit. This is one of my favorite chapters just because it's so dramatic. It's incredibly dramatic, this chapter, and you've got to kind of soak in everything that's happening. This actually happened before the feeding of the 5,000 and right after, according to Mark. Jesus calmed the storm. Mark chapter 5. Let's look at that. They went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. Now, I should have had a map up there. But when Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. You got to put yourself in this picture, okay? Some guy runs up out of the tombs, out of the graveyard. Verse 3, this man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had been chained, often been chained, hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart, broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him, and day and night through the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. Now, you're living in one of the villages around this place, and you hear this guy screaming at night. And you've seen him out there cutting himself, bleeding all over his body where he's cut himself. This is frightening. This is like a horror movie. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran, fell on his knees in front of him, and he shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." That's profound. That's profound. This is coming from a demon-possessed man. A testimony from a demon. "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" Wow. You know, I think the only other confession that is so profound is probably Peter's. Remember who the men say I am? You're the Christ, the Son of the living God. Well, this demon could almost beat him on that one. For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What's your name?" "My name is Legion." Now, I can just see this in the movies. This man, his mouth opens up and this satanic voice comes out. "My name is Legion," okay? "For we are many." And he begged Jesus again and again not to send him out of the area. A large herd of pigs was standing on the nearby hillside. The demons begged Jesus, "Send us among the pigs, allow us to go into them." So he gave them permission, and the impure spirits came out. I don't know if that was a visible thing. Came out, went into the pigs, and the herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. This one is why this is one of my favorite dramatic stories from the Gospels, is I have to picture this in my mind. This bloody, chained guy, he's probably got those chains or irons on his arms or feet. He's coming to Jesus. He's screaming at the top of his lungs. Jesus casts these spirits out of him, at least 1,000, we are many, into this herd of 2,000 pigs, who in turn rush down the hill, off a cliff or something, and into the lake. So you got 2,000 floating dead pigs. Mark, I would almost tell our story at this point of pulling one dead pig out of his tank at his house. But 2,000? Can you imagine what a drama is going on here? You had one comment.
If you look at us humans are more reluctant to honor and acknowledge God than demons or angels or whatever. We have a reluctancy to give Him credit and due.
We do, don't we? We're reluctant to give God credit and to give him the testimony that's due him. But the demons, they didn't seem to have any problem with that. Those tending the pigs, verse 14. That's where it gets really probably a little more intense than we read. Those tending the pigs ran off. I heard that's 2,000 pigs, okay? What's unusual about this picture? Jews and pigs don't mix. Somebody lost a ton of money. 2,000 pigs, 2,000 head, okay? Those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the in the town and countryside, and the people from the town and countryside went out to see what had happened. Wow, look at all those pigs floating out there. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons. They knew this man. They had seen him and they had heard him. They saw him sitting there dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Notice this is a frightening picture. There's a lot of supernatural weird stuff going on here. They're thinking. They were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man, told about the pigs as well, and then the people began to plead with Jesus, get out of here, leave our region. Okay, I don't know if they were angry because they lost all their pigs, or it was just too frightening and they didn't know where to start. Who could be responsible for this? Well, that is enough, but as Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. That's cool. I want to go with you, Jesus. I want to follow you. But Jesus didn't let him. He said, go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. That's next door natural evangelism at its best, isn't it? Tell the people around you what the Lord has done for you and how great his mercy is. Yes. A lot of times Jesus said, don't say anything to anybody, okay? It's not time for me to be revealed completely. But the man went and began to tell in the Decapolis, that's the region of 10 cities, how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. What a testimony. I know you've seen people probably through the years or heard them speak, and some of the best testimonies are from those who, there's a preacher in town, for example, who used to be part of the Mexican mafia. And he's a gospel preacher. Boy, what a story he can tell. And what a witness to Christ and how Christ can change things. That's what people need to see, isn't it? How far he has brought us.
I have a friend that you listen to her story. It's amazing how she went from being partying, had a child out of wedlock, all these things, how God had worked in her life, and now she is married to a youth minister, and it's just a beautiful story how God has worked. And in fact, she said in Canadian, the preacher there did an interview with her. You can watch it on YouTube. And to listen to her tell her story and how along the way the steps where she recognized God's lead.
Yeah.
Just beautiful.
If you'll open up to God, you'll see him work. If you'll allow him to work in your life, you'll see him work.
I knew a lot of her story, but to actually listen to her tell it, it's like, wow.
There's a lot of good stories like that, and I've met a lot of people in my life that have a testimony that just blows your mind, thinking about where they have been and where God has brought them from. What a beautiful thing. I would love to jump into the next section of Scripture. Maybe we'll get into that next week. But I think with 2 minutes to go, we probably better have a couple of questions or comments and close it out for today.
Consider that one of the Gospels in which one mentioned
Two men.
I know there's different viewpoints
Yeah.
in the Gospels, but it's interesting one of them mentioned two.
Yeah. I don't see any contradictions there at all. This one was the most dramatic. Matthew recorded him. Randy?
When Jesus did his miracles, he didn't do them with a flourish to show how he did it. He just let it be done.
Yeah.
He made it simple so that you didn't concentrate on how he did it, that God did it.
There you go. We see in John 6, if we were to read on, how the people responded to that. You know, remember, they wanted to make him king. Wow, what a king who can, provide provisions for an entire army in a millisecond. Jesus, that wasn't Jesus. It wasn't Jesus. He wasn't out in the forefront saying, look what I did. He was meeting needs. He was feeling compassion. Any other comments? Well, I appreciate your questions and comments today. We will move on with that, Lord willing, next week. Thank you very much.